Um, Good afternoon again, everybody. My name is Azizan Aziz, and I hope everybody had a great lunch. And we're going to have a great session coming up. I am a faculty at the Center for Building Performance and Diagnostic, which is part of the School of Architecture. And we've been working with the Scott Institute in investigating, researching, and developing technologies for energy reduction and in-demand site management. And what we're looking at right now is commercializing some of these technologies so it can be available in the marketplace. We do have a set of outstanding panelists today to debate and give us insight on the topic of driving the built environment to higher performance with energy-efficient technologies and innovation. Our panelists include Scott Bernotas, who's the Associate Vice Chancellor for Facilities at the University of Pittsburgh. Thank you for coming. Michael Barnard, the project Director at Oxford Development. Katie Flynn, Energy Manager at Giant Eagle. Aurora Sherrod, Executive Director of Green Building Alliance. And David Kang, Vice Chancellor for Infrastructure and Sustainability, and the Chief Facilities Officer at the University of Colorado. I like the title CFO as being Chief Facilities Officer. That's fantastic. So our panelists came with very impressive resumes, and I would suggest that you read them in your agendas or online. Also, we have Steve Gunter, which is our Director of Facilities and Operations. And I'm going to give the mic to him. He'll be moderating this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Azizan. And it's great to be here with this panel. I'm most excited about these chairs and being the first group to sit in them. We were just at my Nana's house for Easter over the weekend, and I can tell you if these chairs were in her living room, we would not be sitting in them. We'd be looking at them. They're that beautiful. So we're going to kick this off with a quote that sounds like it's exactly suited for this conference. It starts with, "Working together, we're going to help businesses, cities, and states achieve their climate goals and accelerate the transition to a low-carbon future." Sounds like something that the folks sitting in the audience on stage here are already helping to do. That quote's actually from the University of California System President, Janet Napolitano, during a launch of the University Climate Change Coalition, better known now as UC3. That happened in February 2018, and that coalition plans to pull together best practices, policies, and recommendations from all the UC3 forums across the country into a framework that can be replicated around the world. So David, first question goes to you. Your chancellor is one of 13 North American leading universities that has joined the push for research-driven climate policies and solutions, focusing first not just on your campus, but your broader community. Tell us a little bit more about UC3, how it's going to drive higher performance at your campus, the University of Colorado at Boulder.
Throughout history, the university has been a respected pillar in the community across the globe. You know, our institutions are driven by two fundamental activities, research and education. We strive to shape and educate the next generation of citizens and leaders. We're also about discovery, finding the truth, sharing knowledge, and solving problems. It's in our DNA. This is what we do every day, day in and day out. About a month ago, as Steve mentioned, CU Boulder, along with 12 other North American universities from the US, Canada, and Mexico, announced the formation of the University Climate Change Coalition, which is rooted in the idea that research universities should take on an expanded role in creating a better understanding of climate change through research, data collection, and modeling that can inform action, particularly at the local and regional level, in a non-political way. Right? It's about facts. So what do we bring to the table? Expertise in areas including climate modeling, energy storage, next generation renewables, smart energy and efficient technology, sustainable transportation and innovations, as well as deep understanding of the social sciences, economics, policy, and regulation. And it's not just us. You know, we have partners across the country and across the world who can also do these things. A real example of what we're doing at CU Boulder is the creation of a living sustainability laboratory on our campus, where we plan to integrate research and education into our daily operations to create a fertile ground for innovation, entrepreneurship, by bringing together students, faculty, industry partners, the community, venture capital, with the goal of taking applied research quickly into commercialization so that we can actually make a difference. I'm particularly excited about the opportunity to enhance our operations as well. I'm also in charge of the facilities through robust data analytics, machine learning, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. I think that could be a game changer in how we actually operate our facilities more efficiently, as well as opportunities for cost savings. From an infrastructure standpoint, sustainability is intertwined with everything we do, from how we operate, retrofit, and construct buildings to how we plan for the future of the campus. It's not just about the initiatives themselves, but it's about saving money, using our resources more efficiently. I have a saying, the most efficient building is the one that we don't build. Enhancing resiliency and leading by example in the community. It's about how we integrate the built environment into the natural environment. We're also focused on how we can more closely integrate sustainability, education, research, and operations into a seamless and well-coordinated efforts that's enduring, collaborative, and most important, impactful. This means we must make improvements on how we use our facilities, reducing energy and water consumption, integrating smart energy and renewable technologies, promoting sustainability and procurement. How many folks actually buy stuff from Amazon and all the packaging? Right? I went to a conference and I actually sat down with Amazon and said, hey, can we do something together to reduce that? And as we do this and we think about the investments that we need to make in resources, time, and effort, it really is a balancing act between what we need, with what we want, with what we need to change, and what we can afford to fund. In every case, it has to make business sense. It has to pencil out, or it's not going to be sustainable. That's the challenge. But the technology exists. The ideas are there. The question is, how do we work together to move this agenda forward? Another key area that we're really focusing on is climate resiliency, and more broadly, community resiliency. So this impacts everybody in this room in one way or another. This is what keeps me up at night. How do I make sure that the doors are open at the university? This is what kept me up at night when I worked at the White House. In my past life, it was about the continuity of the presidency and our form of government. Now it's about education and research. For others in this room, it may be about keeping the production line going, or maybe just making sure that you have power so that you have heat at night in the winter. We live in dynamics and sometimes unforgiving environment. So if the lessons from Hurricanes Katrina, Sandy, Harvey, Maria don't wake us up, what will? So we need to be prepared for these disruptions. We need to invest in capabilities to help weather these storms. We need to work as a community to identify and mitigate vulnerabilities, or at a minimum, we need to be able to keep our folks safe and be able to respond quickly and resume normal operations. As I said before, sustainability also means that our solutions are cost effective. This has been a focus for our team at CU. It's not just about doing it, it also has to make sense. We're focusing on becoming smarter and more sustainable so that we can become more resilient. But we can't do this in a vacuum. We need to establish, nurture, and expand research, innovation, partnerships, collaboration, and to really make an impact, it has to be a partnership between everybody that's in this room, and more importantly, everyone that's not in this room. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, David. And just as a reminder to the audience, David's comments covered such a broad range. We are going to leave time at the end for questions from the audience. Please use the app. You have information on your table about how to access it, and we'll be able to address those questions at the end. So moving from a North American focus to a US initiative, I'm going to turn to Aurora and talk about 401 million square feet of space that's united to try to catalyze transformation in their built environment. I'm talking about the 2030 districts nationwide. We've got about 1/5 of that overall portfolio here in Pittsburgh. It started about 5 years ago downtown as it expanded to include our neighborhood here in the Oakland district within Pittsburgh. David talked about a number of things that are going to happen through the UC3 initiative, and some of those may have parallels to things that have already started here in Pittsburgh with the 2030 district. What have been some of the achievements for folks that may not be familiar in the audience with 2030? And how have you achieved that success? The portfolio that's included is so diverse. How do you drive success across that diverse portfolio against such an ambitious goal?
Okay, I'm going to see if I can hit all of those things. So taking a step back a little bit for context, for those of you in the audience who aren't familiar with it, in the early 2000s, there was an architect named Ed Mazria out of New Mexico who did some back-of-the-envelope calculations, said, if we're going to solve this whole climate change thing, what's building's contribution? Ran the numbers and said, wow, that is significant. Our existing building stock is consuming a ton. We're continuing to build and renovate new buildings. Over time, what needs to happen if we're going to move buildings from being one of the major contributors for climate change to part of the solution is these 2030 goals. And the answer essentially in numbers, which I know a lot of you love, and I do too, is carbon neutral for all new construction by the year 2030. And 50% reductions in energy use for existing buildings below baselines by the year 2030. Then you have to layer in 50% reductions below baselines of water use and transportation emissions. And oh yeah, everybody needs to do it. So when you do this in the early 2000s, it went out to the architecture, urban planning community, and they said, this is great, and they started working with some really forward-thinking owners and institutions across the country, and just ticking away one building at a time until an individual named Brian Geller out of Seattle was walking around Seattle, saw their district steam plant, and said, what if I talk to all the owners who are connected to that facility and ask them with their existing buildings to contribute to these 2030 challenge goals? What would that do? And he created the first 2030 district, the Seattle 2030 district, in collaboration with the city of Seattle. In Pittsburgh, we thought that was such a great idea that we adopted the model in 2012. We launched in August 2012 with 61 buildings and just over 30 million square feet. So remember those numbers. And just in downtown. We did it quietly. We talked to owners and institutions who we thought would be interested. And it's a really interesting conversation to go to a building owner and say, 50% reductions by 2030, energy, water, transportation emissions. And oh yeah, we're a green building organization, so we're going to help you improve indoor air quality as well, because you can't just seal up a building tight. And a lot of people were really interested, especially those who always thought that they didn't have a seat at the green building table because they weren't eligible for a certification. They weren't moving fast enough. They weren't doing a major retrofit, or their performance was just not very good. So we created a safe space for people to do this across sectors. So commercial office buildings, cultural institutions, public buildings, K-12 schools, retail establishments. And we started making it voluntary, safe, baseline, benchmarks, it's over time, and there's a geographic boundary, and all of those things really resonated with Pittsburghers. So Steve said 401 million square feet internationally. So there are 19 2030 districts in North America. Pittsburgh has somewhere between 20 and 25% of all the square footage committed to those 2030 challenge goals right here. So we're somewhere around 500 buildings and 80 million square feet. If you want to know the most up-to-date numbers, you're going to have to wait 2 weeks until we unveil our 2017 performance numbers on April 19th. But it's really worked amazingly well, and Pittsburgh has just embraced the approach, the time period, and they really like that it's performance-based. It's not prescriptive, right? So you're going to hear from a number of owners up here on the stage today who have been doing these things for a long time. But as a small nonprofit organization, I can't go to any one of them and say, great, here's your list, 1, 2, 3, do it in this order. That doesn't work the way that buildings work. Capital budgets aren't that way, operating budgets aren't that way. You have to let people do it on their own time, in their own space, in their own way, when it's right for them. And then you give them that network where they can learn from each other. And then, because in Pittsburgh we have a downtown boundary and an Oakland boundary. As we've expanded, the number of people that are talking to each other has really increased, and they really enjoy that. But hearing it from each other is so much more powerful than if I said it, or Duquesne Light says it, or a service provider says it. It's just like very different when Pitt and Giant Eagle sit down and are talking to each other and like, oh, is this what you're doing for your coolers? I could do that in my dining establishments. And it's kind of amazing the takeaways that you see from those types of interactions. I think I hit everything there.
I think you did. It's great. Another key to success here in Pittsburgh, I don't think the district boundaries cross a bridge or a tunnel. And so
not yet.
Not yet. And no spoiler alert about the results coming out in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
For us. Fantastic. Well, Scott, your campus is signed up for the 2030 district, and there's been a number of other really exciting things happening at the University of Pittsburgh. Let's start out with some background going back 15 years ago on your campus. In 2003, your campus established the Mascaro Center for Sustainable Innovation. That's your home for education and research related to sustainability. 5 years after that, your faculty got involved, and the Senate passed a statement on sustainability in conjunction with issuing the first greenhouse gas inventory for your large and expansive campus covering all facets of your operations. If we advance another 5 years beyond that to the next milestone, your campus published its report on sustainability, which for the first time ever put in print all of the achievements related to sustainability across your campus life. Talking about research, talking about housing, talking about student, talking about justice, just as well as you're talking about energy. To add to all of that, this last December, your chancellor issued from his desk the Pitt Sustainability Plan, which describes itself as, quote, a strategic framework that calls for dramatic improvement in sustainability across our university by 2030. No coincidence on date, but also, right, got that milestone out there. The thing that resonated with me most are those words, dramatic improvement, stated from the chancellor's desk in the opening letter in the report. You've already done so much on your campus. Obviously, that's a call to do so much more. Can you tell us a little bit about the plan, specifically about the things that you're going to be doing to help to achieve the chancellor's goals?
Great. Thank you very much, Stephen. So it was a new plan. It's the first comprehensive sustainability plan for the University of Pittsburgh. I worked with the university-wide sustainability committee formed in fall of 2016. Just a year later, this last fall, we took the plan to the chancellor. And to your point, he said it's not dramatic enough. It's not bold enough. I said, well, I think it is, boss. He said, no, I think you need to, and so we fully embraced in print the 2030 district goals, and he said, I want to see a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. I want to see a 50% reduction, or 50% of your electrical power supplied by renewable energy. I want to see, it's 50 cubed to make sure I get them all here, because they're relatively new, hot off the press. And at least 50% below the national average for energy use intensities. Now we got a little bit of homework that we're still working on, and what does that last one mean? But the others are pretty clear. And either way, those 50%, and the fourth one that I didn't mention that I'm not going to talk about is water intensity. But all of those are significant changes for a very diverse, 12.5 million square foot university with buildings dating back, about 100 years to brand new modern buildings, which are less challenging. But right off the bat, and we heard that a little bit in David's talk, what we realize is One is these aspirational goals are going to cost, they're going to benefit, but they're also going to cost. And so we feel it's incumbent upon us to figure out what that advantage is, and is it worth the cost for the university. Now, we've committed to those aspirational goals. Since the chancellor signed that, and it's right there up front in page 1, since he signed those ambitious goals, we've been meeting every other week in facilities management on that energy piece, on those 450s. And what we found is, despite having signed up for the 2030, we never really had a comprehensive implementation plan, roadmap, on how we're going to get there. So that's what we've been doing, every other week since then. We've implemented a what we call project payback fund. So the university has committed $5 million for energy projects that will pay back in 5 to 7 years. And we haven't nailed down what that time frame is. Obviously, as we're new to this, newly implementing this, we feel there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with some rapid payback quickly. So what are we doing? What are some of those energy projects we're looking at to use that pot of project payback funds? We're looking at continuous commissioning. In fact, just this morning before I came here, I was in a meeting looking at another approach at continuous commissioning, which would look promising. We're looking at doing energy audits. We've conducted the initial energy audit, 16 of our buildings out of our 130-some buildings. Did an initial 16, what we called our energy hogs, and David will remember that term from the Navy. But those are our most wasteful buildings, looking at an EUI perspective. And so we've got those ECMs. We're going to lump those in along with some approach for continuous commissioning. And we're also going to do a campus-wide lighting survey. We're going to look at tying that, because this, we got to show payback, so that lighting survey will include some select replacement, so I can show some energy savings. We didn't want this energy project payback fund to be tied to just doing studies. We wanted it to literally each piece of it pay back. And then one of the big things that we're doing is trying to figure out what are our target EUIs across the campus. As I mentioned, we got some buildings that are about 100 years old, some buildings that are much newer. So as you can imagine, our energy use intensity is all over the map. And we're trying to find those targets that are reasonable and worth the investment in those older buildings, and then seeing what we can also do even in the newer buildings to tighten that up. And so we are in the process right now of trying to define with our design partners what a status quo, a better, and a best might cost, and what those target EUIs would look like. And so then we would, as we go through the design process, we would say, hey, we want you to, in the schematic design, in the concept phase, give us some preliminary numbers for what is a status quo, a better, and a best. So we're pretty excited about that. We're in the infancy stages. A lot of this, we're in the infancy stages. But again, that sustainability plan has kicked us all in the behind to get going. And so similar to Dave and I were comparing notes, similar to the University of Colorado, we're revamping our design standards to make all of our buildings perform better. And hopefully that's it.
That's great. It's amazing how a commitment from the top can create alignment and break down silos within a university and bring the whole campus together against a unified goal. And the planning is incredibly important. Implementation is what delivers on the outcome that people are promising under the 2030. So Kate, let's switch to you and talk a little bit about implementation. The driving the built environment, it's not just about large institutions, campuses. It gets down to individual, in your case, individual stores and making them perform. And that can not only be a good thing for the environment, but it can be great for making your business competitive and changing the guest experience. So the question remains, though, how do we drive those buildings? If we look at the goals overall on where we need to get to as a country, buildings consume 30% of the electricity, or 30% overall the energy. They're not moving as fast as they should in terms of their share of the overall energy marketplace. Sometimes that gap has to do not just with the planning, but with the implementation of it. You've got about 400 retail locations across 4 states. That's a huge portfolio, and not all connected and nestled within a close geographic proximity. How do you drive implementation and success across a portfolio like Giant Eagle's?
Yeah, Steve, thank you. And it is really challenging when you have so many different locations and you know how to save energy. It's just going and how do you actually flip those switches, change out the equipment, and actually make that improvement's really challenging. So we're really fortunate in Giant Eagle. We have that top-down commitment already. Laura Crett, our CEO, sees sustainability as really a strategic priority, and she sets the expectation that we're going to be continuously improving our energy consumption. So that makes it very easy at Giant Eagle to explain why we need to do that. As a result of that top-down commitment, we have this wonderful cross-functional team at Giant Eagle, and I think this is really key to implementing projects. So on an ongoing basis, people that work in sustainability, engineering, procurement, energy procurement, and operations meet on a continuous basis to evaluate different projects. And what we do is then prioritize projects based on what technology can we roll out to all the stores, what technology applies to our most energy intensive stores, and how easy is it to implement it? What's the payback associated with it? Because we really want to implement the projects that are going to touch the most locations most dramatically first to generate the most savings, and then we can take that savings and use it to justify additional projects as well. So really that cross-functional team is really key in implementing projects. One tool that we use to gain acceptance around projects is we always pilot a technology. I can pretty much guarantee you that we'll never blindly roll out a project to all of our locations without really rigorously testing it. I love doing pilots because it's a way of engaging people that aren't really familiar with energy and sustainability to show the value of a project. One of my favorite days that I've ever spent working at Giant Eagle was the day that we were doing an LED pilot on our sales floor. And what we did is we went into one store and we retrofitted half of the sales floor with LEDs and the other half we left as fluorescents. We then invited all of the executives to literally walk the store so they could literally see pre and post project what we were trying to do. And at the same time, I showed them we have real-time energy monitoring on all of our stores. So I use that as a really valuable tool for telling the energy story. And I was literally able to show them exactly how much energy we reduce. So they could see aesthetically, this won't help hurt the stores. It's going to really improve our guest experience. And oh, by the way, we're actually saving that much energy. They could physically see it. So I think that's really important. When you pilot projects, it also gives you the opportunity for feedback, which is very important. So literally that day, executives were going up to guests and asking, what do you think about these lights? Do you like it? You know what I mean? So it was really nice because we were able to get that feedback. We can go to team members that are going to be in the stores every single day and ask how they feel about it. So a lot of times that's really helpful because then when you're in that piloting stage, you can refine the rollout before you roll out something to all the stores and then realize, oh, shoot, I wish I had made these 3 changes before doing so. One thing that's really important when you're talking about implementing projects is to talk about all of the benefits associated with the project. So it's not just energy. You have that aesthetic value, you might have maintenance savings. So it's really important that when you have that cross-functional team, it enables you to look at a project very holistically and talk about all the benefits associated with it. One thing that's also really key into implementing rollouts is to kind of minimize how many rollouts you have to do. So when you're doing something like a lighting project, you want to see, are there any kind of peripheral projects that I want to pull into this rollout? So a really great example is we're towards the end of implementing LED across all of our sales floor. When we were at the beginning of that project, we looked at the lighting controls. And we actually realized we want to pair a dimming system with this LED retrofit because we can maximize the savings of the project. We're reducing upfront costs because now we have one rollout instead of 2 rollouts. So that's something that's really important. When you're implementing a project, you want to make sure, what other projects do I want to wrap into this rollout? One thing that I don't think people talk about enough, but I worry about it all the time, having 400 locations, is how can we simplify energy projects in terms of implementation? So, I don't know, hopefully people are familiar with Giant Eagle, but here in the city, if you think about all of our stores, they're vastly different from one another. If you want an example, go to the Giant Eagle in Squirrel Hill and then go to our Shadyside Market District location. Incredibly different stores. So when we do something like an LED rollout, I don't have the time and internal resources to necessarily do a custom solution at every single store. So how can I actually roll this out in a time-effective manner? I can't be upgrading our stores for the next 5 years. I need to get it done within a year. So this ties into the dimming systems that we paired with our LED retrofit. Rather than pick, let's say, hundreds of different fixtures that we would need to actually implement this rollout, we were able to narrow it down to 10. But then because we have the dimming control system, we can then custom the light levels at every single store. So it makes it very easy to do the rollout and meet the needs of every single store without having to go to every single store, do a lighting layout, do a light analysis and things like that. So it helps really ease the implementation. One thing you also have to work with is all of your partners. When you're getting ready to do an implementation project, you have to really be able to trust your vendors. You want to partner with your utilities if you're pursuing things like rebates. Make sure you're really getting all the value you can. And also set expectations. Set expectations for your vendor in terms of timeline, in terms of what you actually want the outcome to be, so everyone is on the same page. And then when you actually start to implement the project, make sure you're in constant communication. Make sure you're actually following your timeline. Make sure you're sharing lessons learned. If you have one crew that they found an efficiency and they're able to, reduce install time by 10%, you want to make sure that all the install teams are sharing from that knowledge and you're benefiting from it. So once you're underway with your rollout, you want to be in constant communication. Make sure you're actually implementing your plan as necessary. And one important aspect of implementing projects that I think a lot of times people forget about is when it's done, following up, reporting on it. One thing that I always kind of laugh about is when it comes to energy efficiency, a lot of people are focused on the P&L statements. And I always track energy cost, energy consumption, and energy price. So as we're doing this LED retrofit, I'm all over the stores watching their bills, watching their energy line, and there was a handful of stores that I noticed their energy costs went up after this LED project. So I start stressing out, I go into all the bills, and I realize, okay, they actually reduced consumption. 2 line items increased to the point it completely negated from a cost perspective our LED rollouts. And then I actually had to create the story internally and say, listen, this turned from a cost savings to a cost avoidance, and actually show people we absolutely reduced and the project was successful, and this is what would have happened if we hadn't done it. So it's really important that you're communicating with your vendors, communicating internally on the success of a project, and you also want to monitor it to make sure you actually did receive that savings. For a lot of projects, you can install controls incorrectly, and then they're actually not functional, so you always want to do that due diligence after you implement a project, communicate that success, ensure it's working as it should be, and that eases kind of when you have your next project, because you already have that internal buy-in, which is so critical into getting more projects done.
Thanks, Katie. I think it's amazing how Giant Eagle has such a commitment to brand standards that adds actually complexity in trying to implement projects, because you've customized your brand to all the different real estate that you occupy. And you've done it in a way that has not diminished the guest experience when you've rolled out a project across your portfolio.
I've been with Giant Eagle for about 3 years, and when I started at Giant Eagle, I was like, we have to have kind of like groups of stores, and it took me about a year to really accept that every one of our communities that we're in is different, and every one of our stores in those communities is really different, so it's really unique, but it's also fun.
See, I only thought that existed on a college campus. You guys can, right? Every building's unique. It happens at Giant Eagle, too. Talking about unique buildings, Michael, I'll turn to you for our last panel question. Build smart, build sustainable, operate efficiently. Those are words that resonate with this audience, but it's also ripped directly from corporate material from Oxford Development. But sometimes the markets don't reward cost or complexity associated with the type of innovations that we'd all like to push. So you're a private developer. Tell me what limitations you face when you're implementing new methodologies or technology. What approach does Oxford use to drive improvements in buildings' performance while still facing that challenge?
Well, I think in general for us, the biggest challenge is, like any other project, construction projects, they're very difficult to start. And they're difficult to start because of budget and because of schedule. And so whenever we're trying to implement new methodologies, technologies, construction practices, it may be a little counterintuitive to the design and construction process to say, well, how do we reevaluate what we did the last time? And that's going to stretch the schedule, potentially stretches the budget. It provides uncertainty, which tends to be the enemy of the investors, the lenders, and the folks that are actually writing the checks. So what we've done, at least, is tried to look at it more of an incremental approach. How can we take the next project to a little higher standard? We're very fortunate we have leadership in our company who has stepped up and is looking at it from what's the right thing to do for people, for the planet, for whether it be 2030 district, LEED certification, the P4 measures here in Pittsburgh. Those are all things that are very important to us, and when it comes from the top down, we look for ways to take the next step in that direction. But again, I think the biggest challenges for us are proving it out in an efficient process, and then also being able to execute the projects efficiently so that they're successful in the end, and then obviously lead to the next project. So we certainly aren't doing as much as we'd like. I know from when we look at it internally, but through that incremental approach, we've been very successful in elevating and going beyond what the minimum we have to do, and hopefully starting to achieve more of those aspirational standards. And we're fortunate here locally to have resources that can assist us with that, and can also kind of set expectations from a market standpoint that are above that of kind of the cheapest building you can build by code. So we leverage those relationships and hopefully are proving to be one of the leaders in that arena that way.
Fantastic. Not being able to do everything we'd like, I think, is a common theme across the folks here up on stage as well as in the audience. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I think I have time for one question that's come in from the audience, and I'm just going to toss it out to the panel at large. Please, any of you, jump in on this. The question is, does making buildings energy efficient lead to a rise in either the construction or other operating costs? And if they do, how do you motivate your administration or prospective owners into taking on those higher costs? Anybody?
Steve, I'll jump on that first. Yes, and particularly on the operational side, I learned that, as I mentioned, we have a wide range of portfolios. The older buildings, as Aurora said, they didn't have to take in the same air changes that we have to take in now. And so when we remodel those, we put high efficiency systems in. But guess what? I'm taking out window air conditioners or radiator units. I'm replacing window air conditioners. I'm adding air conditioning when there wasn't. And so my operating costs go up. And I learned you got to be very careful on how you present that data. And I got wrapped around the axle the first time I tried to explain and justify that to the board. And so I've learned my lesson. And and you have to be careful, and you have to tell the story on how that energy cost is better. It might be more for that space than it was, but we bought a benefit, so it becomes a cost avoidance rather than a cost savings.
I think it's yes and no. And so, the example of the LED lights is a great example, right? So it may cost more up front, but the life cycle cost may be significantly lower, especially if you have to pay, $80 an hour for an electrician to come out and re-lamp, every 2 or 3 years versus every 15 years, right? So I think, you know, what Scott talked about, what we're working on as well, changing the design criteria so that we actually are more thoughtful in what we put in there. And then I think more importantly, going from what you talked about, the first cost of construction to life cycle cost. And so looking at the entire system from, you know, when you build it, when you plan it and build it, to disposal, and looking at the life cycle of the building and seeing what's the right investment to make, and doing that in the early stages of planning, I think is the direction that we need to head in. And so the focus has always been on the first cost. How can I save money on this, you know, multi-million-dollar project? Well, you may be saving $500,000, but you're going to be paying $8 million over 60 years of the life of the building, which is probably not the smartest investment. So I think that approach is going to make a difference.
So we answer this question every day, up, down, and sideways. And we make the case for it with all sorts of different owners and sizes and types. And the answer is it doesn't have to, but sometimes it does. And sometimes people get super excited about everything that they're doing, and they want to change the paradigm. And that's a really important thing that I think David just hit on is, you know, this question about buildings consume 40% of all the energy that we use in the United States. We've been using that statistic in the green building industry for 25 years, and the number hasn't changed. That's the problem, right? Because we're not shifting, we're like doing these incremental reductions. And this is why things like the passive house movement has really resonated with some people, because it takes an entirely different approach. It's like, great, take energy use, cut it down by half at the beginning, at a minimum cut it down by half, maybe all the way down to 10%, and then have your most efficient building layer on renewables, and don't worry about it because you're building an asset. And I think that's one of the things that we sometimes forget about in the building industry. It's not just about economics. We're building somewhere that's going to be a place that's going to contribute to that community and our environment for 50, 100, 200 years. And we really need to be treating our buildings like assets.
I think it's possible that as we talk about life cycle assessment, also talking about risk as well. So talking about what happens if energy prices double in 10 years. We're planning on this building being here for another 20 years. So, you know, both in terms of energy costs, in terms of sustainability, in terms of resilience, we also have to be talking about risk, especially when it comes to new construction. And we're going to be stuck with that asset for decades to come. This is really the best opportunity to avoid some of that risk, so we're not implementing projects halfway through and then missing the benefit from doing it from the beginning.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. I think that the challenge, again, is also, there certainly is that first cost, and it is a challenge, but the life cycle cost is something that needs to be evaluated, and that's something that, at least in a lot of the markets that we deal with, changing that paradigm, because so much of our life cycle costs are reliant on tenant behaviors, and, you know, where the savings are actually realized and how that affects kind of the success of the project on the economic model, and it's something that we're working to try to get better at. It's a little different than an institutional scenario where, you know, the same people who own it live there and, you know, can be controlled maybe a little bit better. One of the biggest differentiators for us is would be in some of the amenities and the attractiveness of the property. So some of the low-hanging fruit, whether it's, you know, enhanced energy performance that the tenants realize on, you know, where we can do it incrementally, EV stations that are put in our properties, things like that they see, and we start to see the tenants that want it, pay maybe a slight premium for it. That's where it helps to feed the model back, and it's easier to take those things on at the beginning. So.
Thank you. I think we're at the conclusion of time, so I want to thank the panel for the things that you did before today at your respective institutions or organizations, and the leadership that you exhibit to help drive this important aspect of the built environment to higher performance. Thanks for your insights for the audience today. Looking forward to interacting with you more throughout the rest of the conference. Take care.